Indigenous Affairs. Resuming debate, reprise de débat, the Honourable Member for Newmarket, Aurora.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to acknowledge that the House of Commons, where this debate is based today, sits on the ancestral lands of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. As my honourable colleagues have noted, Indigenous peoples have played a fundamental role in Canada's past and continue to do so today. Canada must continue to stand up for the values that define this country, whether it's welcoming newcomers, celebrating with pride the contributions of the LGBTQ2 communities, or embracing two official languages. And to walk the road of reconciliation, there still is much work to be done, such as we need to address systemic racism and its impact on all communities, including Indigenous communities. As we have indicated, Canada is firmly committed to implementing the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's call to actions. The Government of Canada has made significant efforts to implement the calls to action, and these proposed changes regarding the oath of citizenship demonstrate our firm commitment to achieving this goal. Our goal is to renew the relationship between the Crown and Indigenous peoples, and in order to move forward together, we need to be true partners in this confederation. Advancing reconciliation remains a Canadian imperative, and it will take partners at all levels to make real progress. We know there is more to do, and we will continue to work together. One of the most important ways that we demonstrate this support is to highlight at its citizenship ceremonies throughout this country, whether they are virtual ceremonies that have taken place in recent months or at traditional in-person events. Recognizing the role of Indigenous peoples has played in this country, recognizing the role that Indigenous peoples have played in this country is a fundamental part of our citizenship ceremony. And to this end, at our in-person ceremonies, judges and those presiding over the ceremonies have traditionally acknowledged the Indigenous territory on which the ceremony takes place, and also speak of the history of Indigenous peoples in Canada in their welcome remarks to new Canadians. The stories of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples are the story of Canada itself, and Indigenous peoples will continue to play a critical role in Canada's development as we go forward. During these ceremonies, participants accept the rights and the responsibilities of citizenship by taking the oath of citizenship. The oath of citizenship is a public declaration that someone is joining the Canadian family and is committed to Canadian values and traditions. Mr. Speaker, for this declaration to be truthful and inclusive, it must include the recognition of Indigenous peoples in Canada. Bill C-8, an act to amend the Citizenship Act, Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada's Call to Action number 94, proposes to change Canada's Oath of Citizenship to recognize and to affirm the Aboriginal and treaty rights of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples as referenced in the Constitution. The proposed amendment of oath demonstrates the Canadian government's commitment to responding to calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It also signals a renewed relationship with Indigenous peoples based on the recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership. Reconciliation is an important part to all people in Canada, and the proposed changes to the oath would help and advance reconciliation with Indigenous people in Canada. This would demonstrate support for the diversity that the people of all origins contribute to Canada and our country's history, our fabric, and our identity. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Qu'est-ce commentaire?
Questions and comments?
Member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I listened with interest to the honourable member's remarks about this important legislation. One of the things that we've heard a fair bit of mention in this debate is the the slow progress that is being made on the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I believe the Yellowhead Institute estimated that at the current pace, it's going to be 2057 before all of the calls are implemented. I wonder if the honourable member could provide his thoughts on what the federal government could do differently to accelerate the pace of implementation and ensure that Indigenous people in this country don't have to wait until 2057 to see these important changes implemented.
Honourable Member for Newmarket, Aurora.
I thank the member for their important question. And it reminds me of something my father had always reminded me: act in haste and repent at leisure. And this reconciliation needs to be a process that engages all parties. And so it is important that we carefully consider the perspective of the individuals that we're working with, that we build on a partnership that everybody supports. And that, unfortunately, does take time. There are a lot of things that we'd like to go forward with far more quickly, and we heard about them earlier. But I think we need to be very careful that we engage all parties, that we're sensitive to what's important to them, and that we try to build a collaboration that is long-lasting and is not fraught with peril and conflict in the future.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires?
The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean. I just listened to the answer given by my honourable colleague and said we have to listen to the First Nations, and he's right. And I am 100% in favour of C-8. However, why is the government giving a priority to this kind of measures, which are symbolic in nature but important nonetheless, rather than focusing on the implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples? Is the member opposite in agreement with me that it would make a much more concrete impact on First Nations peoples to do so?
Newmarket, Aurora.
Thank you for that important question as well. And I don't believe that this needs to be mutually exclusive. I think both initiatives are important. So I think we should be moving forward on the UNDRIP commitments as well. So I agree with them.
Some comments. The honourable member for Saskatoon, Grasswood.
Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member from Newmarket, Aurora. Partnerships are a key with Indigenous groups in our province of Saskatchewan. I've seen it with the Saskatchewan school boards, where in Saskatchewan, because many of the kids come from reserve into the city and then move back to the reserve later, on the citizen oath aspect of this bill, because many of us have attended numerous Canadian citizenships, and they're always in advance of 2 or 3 months. I would suggest for the Canadian citizen ceremony that many of them should be done now on reserves to show the partnership of City of Saskatoon. We have the Saskatoon Tribal Council, we have Dakota Dunes and a number of others, and you know, the honourable member from up north here in Saskatchewan has many more. But I think it's good on words, but maybe now the Canadian Truth and Reconciliation, along with the citizenship, we can actually take these ceremonies to reserves.
For Newmarket, Aurora.
To the extent that that is possible, I think that's a great recommendation. I can say that my daughter teaches in school in Ontario, and she has actively engaged in experiencing many of those experiences. I can also say that I went through the Canadian citizenship oath with my parents and 11 kids in tow, and I know how important that ceremony is. So to the extent that we're able to do that, I think that's a great recommendation, and I thank you for that suggestion.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Yukon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I just have a quick comment from the traditional territory of the Tonquatchin Council and the Kwanlundun, who both have signed modern treaties and self-government agreements. I want people to think that if you bought a house, and everyone that's watching on TV, if you bought a house and then you went to move into it and they decided, well, the house wasn't yours, it's not being given to you. So you can imagine how First Nations, Indigenous people felt when they signed treaties and then they weren't honored with the same feeling. So this will give give comfort, give acknowledgement to immigrants. As I mentioned in a recent previous debate, we didn't learn about this in school in any sufficient amount. So this will make the recognition of Indigenous rights, which is in the Constitution, and the sanctity of the treaties that we must abide by. And by the honor of the Crown, we should have abided by from the very beginning. And I think it's a great recognition of that.
The honourable member for Newmarket Aurora.
I'm not sure that I have a question there, but if the statement is that we should be committed to and go forward with the commitments from the Crown to the Indigenous peoples, I fully agree with them.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Skeena Bulkley Valley.